welcome Terry Boardman.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me okay at the back?
Yes.
Yeah, good. It's nice to be with you all again. It's the third time I've been here, and I've enjoyed myself very much on the other 2 times I've been. So I hope you'll find that what I have to present to you today, although it might be a bit provocative for some of you, at least might give you something to go away and think about. You might find I'm coming from a direction which is perhaps a bit different from other people. But that's what it's all about, after all. I think that's what New Horizons is all about. A place where we can hear different views of the situation we all find ourselves in today. Just so you don't misunderstand, if you were here earlier, the slides that were on the loop before, they were all about the green question, the climate change issue, which of course is now very much in the news with Copenhagen starting today. So that you don't misunderstand those, I wasn't actually advocating those views up there. But those are the kind of views which are used by the representatives of the New World Order, the global elite, to justify what it is that they are actually seeking to do. Okay, so what am I going to be talking about today? I came across this article on the net, Global Research, you probably know of it. An article called The AFPAT War Racket, The Obama Illusion Comes Crashing Down by David Grohr. And it flagged up for me some of the really dangerous situation which we're now approaching, particularly in the States. And I dare say, because unfortunately we tend to copy too many things from the States, we'll probably end up copying this as well. Just read it to you. It's become clear that an opinion has emerged among a growing segment of the US population. If the government will keep pouring money into banks and war and won't stop the theft of US taxpayer money by holding accountable those responsible for it, we must. And the question arises after that is, can it be done non-violently? I certainly hope it can, he says. However, this growing segment of the population uses strong rhetoric and is prepared to take up arms. With over 200 active militia cells who are equipped with weapons, training and strategizing, the government must take swift action to rein in the economic elite. Otherwise, we're heading to war, not in a distant foreign land, but within the US. And then, so you've got a situation where people are getting so angry in the States now that the militias who were emerging in the mid-90s are now really, the second wave of those are coming forward. And training and arming, a lot of anger is building up. And I dare say, amongst a lot of people who are suffering in this country, it's building up here too. The question then we have to ask is this exactly what the New World Order wants to justify further repression? Another article I came across, same site, Global Research, Michel Chossudovsky, who's a sort of a left-wing writer, has a very large and active website. And he calls this the real crisis. What is the real crisis? So he says, the Copenhagen Summit not only serves powerful corporate interests which have a stake in the global multi-billion-dollar carbon trading scheme, it also serves to divert public attention from the devastation resulting from the real crisis underlying the process of economic globalization and a profit-driven war without borders, which the Pentagon calls the Long War. We are at the crossroads of the most serious crisis in modern history. War and economic depression constitute the real crisis. War and economic depression constitute the real crisis. That's the point. Is that the real crisis? Yet both the governments and the media have focused their attention on the environmental devastation resulting from CO2 emissions, which is upheld as the greatest threat to humanity. He goes on to talk about the carbon trading scheme, which is obviously going to make a lot of money for a lot of people. So that's my question really. Is that war and economic depression, imperialism and capitalism? These are the two things that he posits as the problem, causing the problems. So my question is, The New World Order aims in this century. Is it just about the acquisition of power and wealth by selfish elites bent on enslavement of the masses and the population? Or is there something more to it than that? You might say, can it be more than that? More than enslavement of humanity? But if we just say that that's what it is, imperialism, capitalism, the enslavement of the population, that's actually a very old agenda. And that's nothing particularly modern in a certain sense. Nothing new about it. Here's something from another, just a standard kind of website, which is going in a different direction. A direction which Chossudovsky and people on the left, whole political left, might not want to go in. This is from the website overlordsofchaos.com. So they're prepared to think a little bit more out of the box, so to speak. And they then talk about what's called conspiracy theory. Namely, that the New World Order wished to reduce the world's population to a sustainable level in perpetual balance with nature, mass culling of the planet, planned parenthood, adulteration of food and water, man-made viruses, drastic reduction of the population, perhaps to 1 or 2 billion only, global feudal fascist state, world government, world religion. You know all of this. You're familiar with it. To kill 90% of the world's population to control all aspects of the human condition. Now, probably even people on the political left who are not happy with conspiracy theorists would not go down this route. Now, of course, Alex Jones, I'm sure you're also very familiar with, his take in his latest video, The Fall of a Republic, similar. The elite's main drive is to destroy national sovereignty for the sake of power. Globalist values are a hostile takeover of every nation on earth. They wish to dominate the population, dominate the poor. Human life is a negative, so get rid of most of the population. They're useless eaters. And their aim is an 80% reduction. So again, these are human power drives, the will to power by human beings. And then on a completely different direction, we come to another aspect of the so-called conspiracy theory, which is not to do with imperialism, capitalism, money and power, has more to do with what I would call blood and genes, even if those blood and genes are so-called aliens. I'm sure you're familiar with various aspects of the ancient astronaut theories of people like Zechariah Sitchin and others who claim that a long time ago the human race was either bioengineered or created by aliens, and then these alien genes came into our elites' bloodlines from way back when in Sumeria and then Babylonia and Egypt and on, until we arrive at David Rockefeller. And that's another wing of the conspiracy theories. Yeah? But you can see that on the one hand then you have money and power. That's a narrative most people can recognize in the conventional world. And then on the other hand, this kind of thing, aliens. Now, I've found a lot of interesting things in the ideas of this man who died a long time ago, 1925, Rudolf Steiner, who was an Austrian philosopher and spiritual scientist. And back in 1919, he said, after the British and the Americans had won World War I, he said, the Anglo-American element may well achieve world dominion, but without the threefolding of society, and I hope I'll have time to come to that later, this dominion of the Anglo-American world domination will flood the world with the death of culture and the sickness of culture. Now seriously folks, can anybody doubt that since 1919 that has not happened? Are we not in this situation today? Who is driving? Where has the green, the present climate change agenda mostly come from? Where has the war on terror agenda come from? Where has the financial breakdown agenda come from? It's our responsibility, ultimately, as English-speaking people, because it's come from our part of the world. Because our part of the world, since World War I, has been in control of the world. The English-speaking countries. So, what then is the real crisis? And my view in a sort of a nutshell would be something like this. But this is only the surface of it. But the real crisis is caused by the one basic mindset that underlies and informs capitalism, communism, fascism, Jesuitism, scientism, and all religious and biblical literalist fundamentalism. And that is the mother of all isms, namely materialism. Matter-realism. The idea that says that only matter is real. The five sense, what we can see, smell, touch, and hear. Only this is real. Or even the more subtle version of materialism. Because physicists and scientists knew 100 years ago already that there was no such thing as matter. They were already beginning to realize that matter was energy. But the energy that they were talking about then at the time of Einstein, this was simply a more subtle form of matter, in fact. And what they're trying to do in CERN now, with a great big large hadron collider, which I'm sure you've heard about, in trying to find the so-called God particle, the Higgs boson, they're still looking for this so-called basic building block, you see, the essential particle. Even if they assume that this is some kind of dancing energy, the mindset which they're following is still looking for these building blocks, particles. It's still essentially a materialist point of view. So they're still, except that they're seeking to see through their scientific instruments. So all these isms have been born out of the womb of the same conceptual mother, materialism, mother realism, matter realism. And this, how has this happened? Why is that? This is a part of the process of the evolution of consciousness. I'm not going to talk about Darwin, the evolution of bodies. I'm more interested in the evolution of consciousness. That means, for example, how is our thinking today different from the thinking of people 300 years ago, at the time of Shakespeare or Bacon, or different from the ancient Egyptians and so on? How has consciousness changed? How is the thinking of a 3-year-old infant different from the thinking of a 13-year-old teenager? How do they see the world differently? How does the 13-year-old teenager wrestling with puberty see the world differently from a 43-year-old person deep in midlife crisis? Or an 83 old age pensioner? These are different levels of being, different levels of consciousness. And the same thing has happened in history. So this materialism, which has really been with us as a mindset since the beginnings of natural science, Francis Bacon, the 17th century, Shakespeare's time, is really a stage on the path. It's a kind of adolescence, if you will. Because it's a stage which said, just like adolescence, which we've all been through, puberty, when you're trying to deal with your hormones wrestling and surging through your body, everything becomes really basic there. It becomes really down to earth. And that's when the materialism really begins to affect teenagers, and you can start to see it actually even in the physical attitudes. They walk around, you know. And you can feel the way, and they're not skipping anymore like children used to do when we were, which we all did, when we were 5 and 6 and 7. Skipping. Think about that. Teenagers don't skip. They have come down to earth. And so there's a kind of like this was the historical time when our culture really came down to earth. And with natural science started to investigate the world of matter, particularly the mineral world. Industrial Revolution. Started just less than half an hour's drive from where I live in Stourbridge in the Midlands, Coalbrookdale. The Industrial Revolution started from there, and the whole kit and caboodle of production and consumerism, pollution and everything else spread out from there all over the world. So, where I'm coming from is basically two things in a sense, which I should make clear to you. One is when I was young, I was 21, I went to Japan. I lived there for 10 years. And in a nutshell, what I learned from that was, this was the 1970s, early 80s, the first part, and then later on in the early 90s. So I saw Japan's economic takeoff, and I saw the beginning of its economic collapse. And what I really learned from that was to observe my own cultural conditioning more objectively. And I realized how I had been culturally conditioned by my own English upbringing. Because when you put yourself in a culture which is totally different from your own, and although it might seem like it's very similar to ours on the surface with all the technology, Japanese culture is actually very, very different. When you really start to interact with it humanly. And then when I came back here after being there 7 years, I realized the extent of my own cultural condition. And it's really hard to become aware of that. Very, very difficult. I'll give you just one concrete example. It took me about 2 years for this penny to drop when I was over there. There's an example right there, by the way. This penny to drop. They don't have that expression in Japanese. So a penny dropping, for the English, we think of that as thinking. Money is thinking for an English person. The penny drops in a machine. Right? They don't have that in Japanese. Anyway, everywhere I went in Japan, whoever I met, these people, whether it be maths professors or taxi drivers or whoever, they would say, here in Japan we think such and such. What do you over there in England think about this? And I would always say, well, I was 21, 22. I would say, 21, 22, what do you like? Me. Yeah? You're proud of your own self, your own independence. So I would say, well, we've got 55 million people in England. I've got my own views, they've got their views. I don't know what they think. And they kept asking me the same question wherever I went. And after 2 years, as I say, the penny finally dropped. And then I realized, for these people, this is the reality. The idea that we, in this culture, all think the same thing. And then I realized, I've been brought up to think I'm an individual. You must be an individual. You must have your own ideas. That's how we are actually brought up. To believe. Now you might think, nah, what about the media and so on and so forth. But I'm sure you understand what I mean. That if in this culture you were to admit, well, I just think the same as everybody else, then what will people think of you? You're not an individual. Because we set store by being individuals in this culture, even if perhaps we're not. But we've been brought up to think like that. So that was just one case. And so a number of things like that, it really opened my eyes to many differences, what it means to be culturally conditioned. And as I said, I learned a number of things. And then came back and encountered the ideas of this man, Rudolf Steiner, because I had various questions. How can the East and the West bridge each other? How can we communicate? What's the relationship between our culture and theirs? And if there's no relationship, if we can't bridge, are we going to end up in war again? Like 1941? Yeah? One of the points that Steiner made was that if the East cannot find in the West a culture that it can respect, the East will attack the West. If the West cannot present to the East an economics which has morality, at some point, eventually, the East will attack the West. Because the East believes in the spiritual morality and nobility of man. And the East wants to see that in Western politics and in Western technology and in Western science and culture. And if we don't, and economics, and if we don't take that to the East, and let's face it, this is what we do, right? We go to the East, whether it's Russia or China, and we say, this is modern. You have to do this. Iran.